All right, so next up, a guy who needs no introduction. No. Come on, this guy. You're gonna love this guy. Dan Shapiro, an old friend of mine. His LinkedIn says that he's a psychologist, speaker, author, and vice dean for faculty administrative affairs at the Penn State College of Medicine, but his beard says other things. It has its own website. He has written and script advised for Grey's Anatomy, How to Get Away with Murder. He's helped create legitimacy and authenticity of cancer patients in TV shows and their narrative. He has really helped the general public understand what actually happens in real life on television. It's a really big deal. But he's going to shed all his fancy schmancy Ph.D. stuff, get real. This is his third time speaking at this conference in the last couple of years. His first book, actually, called Mom's Marijuana, that's got its own website waiting to happen. You're going to hear all about it. Trust me, this guy. It was the first book that I read as a survivor. I discovered it through the Planet Cancer website, going way back machine for those of you from the legacy days. And it just kicked off a wonderful relationship between he and I and our community. He is one of the most Kool-Aid drinking fanatics I've ever met, and so passionate about this. Just a friend, an advocate, spokesperson. Where is he? Dan Shapiro. Come on up.
My rent-a-friend is in the house. Yeah, he upped his rates. It's really kind of a bummer. Good morning, CancerCon. So I'm not going to talk to you about Neulasta. I will be doing a brief interpretive dance related to another drug. Hang with me, it's coming. I'm going to start by reading you a real chart note. I'm going to tell you one person's illness experience, mine, and along the way point out some things about it that will probably be fairly familiar. You may experience, your words coming out of my mouth because, we're part of the same universe, part of the same family here. This is a 20-year-old white male. This is a real chart note, who presented with a 4-week history of shortness of breath, wheezing, and night sweats. The patient reported a greater than 10-month history of classic B symptoms, including fever, night sweats, chills, itching, and nodal pain in his right shoulder with the ingestion of alcohol. Further CT evaluation of this patient revealed a greater than 14-centimeter mediastinal mass, and palpable supraclavicular nodes are observed bilaterally. The prognosis is good. The 5-year survival rate for stage 2B Hodgkin's disease is 70%. The patient will undergo 6 cycles of MOP chemotherapy, followed by mantle radiation. We anticipate that his treatment will last approximately 6 months. So in my family, gardens were started early. My parents always kept a small plot of land in the backyard as a garden, roughly the size of your average bedroom. So it's pretty small. But they hovered around that garden all spring and summer. They hoed, mulched, fertilized, sampled the soil, pinched leaves. At night, my parents would huddle together over pictures and books and seed magazines, which eventually accumulated and then took over the entire dining room. This would be my father looking at one of those magazines, like one of the seed magazines. You see, honey? That's a bud. And then a few months later, there'd be a crop of something, usually a crop of mutant something. One year it was zucchini. Thousands of zucchini crawled out of the garden as if they'd been cast in a late-night horror movie or something. Right, seriously, you'd like, in the movie, you'd have like a hero there with his flashlight standing next to the garden with all the zucchini. Darn flashlight worked in the supermarket. While like swinging light bulb, zucchini swaying in the moonlight, cut back and like there's like empty sneakers and drag marks into the garden. Neighbors came home to anonymous zucchini breads, cakes, pies, delicately balanced inside of screen doors or stuffed into their mailboxes. I remember I was home once with my mother when Bob, our next door neighbor, banged on our front door. Shapiro, I know you're in there, and I know the zucchini cake came from you. And my mom was like, shh, pretend we're not here. That year, my father kept a huge zucchini next to the bed in case we had intruders. So then I was a junior in college. I was diagnosed with Hodgkin's disease, a lymphoma, a cancer, right? And I called a friend who was the only guy I knew who was my age who had also had cancer. Like, I knew no one. So I get on the phone. He mutters 5 gruff words into the phone. This is verbatim. He goes, chemo's grim, man. Get weed. So I nonchalantly wander into the living room and announce to my parents that I'm going to get marijuana to help with the nausea and vomiting. There was an oppressive silence, punctuated only by the rapid tapping of my mother's finger on her armchair. Then she began speaking, her voice carrying that staccato edge she generally reserved for my father. She told me about the dangers of illicit substances, the horrors of visit lives filled with addiction, and swore to me that her house, our house, would never shelter a drug user. And she did that like mom finger thing. Like, is there like some pamphlet that comes when your child is born that teaches you like how to do the finger thing or how to like pronounce their name in an octave best left to dogs and bats? So I argue back with the vigor of an adolescent with a cause. Hey man, for me, marijuana's not gonna be addictive, right? And soon my liver's gonna be processing toxins a lot more dangerous than that, man. But in the end, we were exactly where we were at the beginning. Once my mother's entrenched in a position, argument is futile. So I withdrew. I don't know what happened to my mother during the night. Maybe she awoke in a sweat, noxious images of her son and chemotherapy etched in her mind's eye. Maybe she studied the pamphlets she'd been given about chemotherapy by the nursing staff. I don't know. But I do know this. The next morning, my mother ran her finger down the smoke shop listings in the phone book, called a number of establishments, and 20 minutes later was walking down the dusty aisles of a place called Stairway to Heaven. Asking lots of questions, no doubt, because my mother is a Consumer Reports shopper. So I was in the backyard when my mother came home. She appears up on the back porch. This is the same back porch she has used for years to call my brother and I to dinner. And she's waving a 3-foot bong over her head. Is this one okay? They didn't have blue. My favorite color. So I go in the house. I appreciate those of you pretending to not know what a bong is. You guys are such posers. So I go in the house. Mom gives me the massive bowling trophy-sized bong, and she gives me $40 to go buy marijuana. So I'm standing there like, I don't ask any questions about her transformation. I just took the bong and the money and I left. So I come home about a half hour later, and I was raised in one of those 1970s like raised ranchers that sprouted all over the country that are really ticky-tacky. So on hearing the front door open, you can hear it anywhere in the house, right? It's a crappy, like, little put-together house. So my mother appears down on the landing, and she wants to see it, which feels weird. Like, living under her scrutiny all these years, I'm like, but then there's a part of me that realizes it's her weed. So I hand her the little baggie. She's like, where's the rest of it? And I'm thinking to myself, what, Ma, you think like I'm gonna come home in like a briefcase, like in a direct, like, here's your first brick, here's your second brick, here's your third brick. Like, this is just a little baggie. She's like, where's the, I'm like, Ma, I swear that's all of it. This is my mother. That's all you get for $40? I'm like, yeah, Ma. She gives it back to me. She steeples her fingers. You can see where this is going. She goes, give me the seeds. That summer, my parents plowed, fertilized, hoed, mulched, sampled the soil, and in August, the bushy crop arrived. 10 plants grew over 11 feet tall in our backyard, eclipsing the sunflowers planted in front of them. It was more marijuana than I could have smoked in my entire goddamn life. I'm just like looking for water. Oh, here it is. So here's a little bonus material for you. Bob showed roses. So there were always people like walking through Bob's backyard, like going, "Oh, Bob, you're such a genius. Oh, Bob, that's amazing. Look at that. Oh," and apparently once one of them stopped and said, "Bob, what's that in the Shapiro's garden?" And Bob goes, "What, those are ordinary sunflowers." And he said, no. Towering up over around the sunflowers. And Bob's like, "That's okra." Because like Bob was such an expert, I guess they believed him. So I'm going to tell you some more stories about the experience. But when my mother planted a weed she truly despised in my family's sacred garden, it told me that the landscape of our lives had literally and figuratively changed forever. And we were never going to go back to the way it was, no matter how much we wanted to. And so many of you have been through that same thing. I'm going to tell you some more stories about it. When I was 15, my mother found the 3 Penthouse magazines hidden between my mattress and the box spring. My therapist says this is really good for me to say these things out loud. No, she angrily marched them to the trash bin, shouted words like objectification, gynecological, and disgusting. And she threw my dirty magazines in the trash. Now, a few quick words about the trash can. The lid of the trash can had recently been involved in an accident involving my little brother and a hockey puck, and it was like badly misshapen. It had rained that week, and we'd had fruit salad. So these are now literally dirty magazines. I know most of you get your porn now a different way. Try to hang with me. So I'm 15 years old. I go running outside after my mom's gone back inside. "You got no right to go in my room and throw out my stuff, man. These are mine." And I fish them out of the trash. And we end up outside my bedroom door, me with the magazines like tucked under my arm like a favorite blanket or something. And I had one of these rare, I'm 15, I had one of these rare neuronal firings, like something myelinated, something happened, like a little cell said, "Wait, what are you doing? You don't need those." And they've got fruit salad on them. And I was about to hand them over thinking, maybe this really isn't a battle I want to wage, when my mother, seeing me clutch the magazines that desperately, said, "You want him that badly? All right, I can think of a lot worse things you could be doing." She turned, walked away, and we never talked about my sexuality again. So at the beginning, after this massive tumor was found in my chest, there were a lot of tests. And as you know, as a patient, you spend a lot more time waiting to have tests or waiting for the results than you do going through the tests themselves. Well, on this particular day, I'm sitting in a waiting room waiting to have a bone marrow aspiration, a procedure involving bone and needles, 2 words which should never occupy space in the same sentence, man. But be that as it may, I'm like sitting there in the waiting room. I'm reading the same paragraph in the like Sports Illustrated that's like 3 years old, again and again, you know what I'm talking about? And now my mother came with me to the more challenging procedures, armed usually with a crossword puzzle or a paperback, but she would never do or read them because my mother is one of those people who will start conversations with anyone at any time. Like, I mean, seriously, like you could be like trying on lingerie, having a little private moment with your belly and your thighs. My mother will like peek over the thing and like start talking to you. So it's no surprise she starts a conversation with the one other woman in the room who has her hands patiently folded in her lap, the stoic look of a veteran. Right, there's 2 different kinds of patients in waiting rooms. There's the newbies and the veterans. Like I was a newbie. The newbies are like lemurs. Like anytime somebody comes in the room, I'm like, "What, me? My turn? Is it me? No, okay. Now? No? Okay. blink, 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 blink. So she starts talking to the one other woman in the room. Turns out her son has leukemia. He's about 18 months into his treatment. The woman expertly lists her son's side effect symptoms, everything he's been through. And she goes, he's back in there having a spinal tap. Doesn't want me in there, doesn't want me to see him cry. And my mother goes, and now they do that weird international motherhood, sisterhood thing, like they've connected forever. Like, if one of them needed a kidney, the other would be like, oh yeah, just grab, I got 2. No worries, just unzip that baby, go ahead. So she describes all the chemo, like the specific agents, and then she stops speaking. She opens her eye a little wider, and there's silence in the room, which is weird where my mother's around. And I look up, and the woman points at me, and she says, has he banked sperm? And my mother goes, sperm? Loud enough for people in distant zip codes to hear her. And one says, yeah, the chemotherapy is going to make him sterile, but there's a new urologist in town who has a sperm bank. Wait, she fishes in her purse, finds the number written on the back of an envelope, holds it over her head as if either proclaiming sperm bingo or waving down a sperm rescue jet on a deserted island. And then she takes the envelope, she hands it across the room to my mother, who takes it, and then they both smile and look at me. So when we go back to see Dr. Brodsky, my mother taps him on the shoulder and says she has something really important to discuss. And from her tone, she makes it sound like we're going to donate something huge to a charitable organization. Brodsky, frustrated, wants chemotherapy to start immediately. My mother wants to postpone it so we can explore donating sperm. And they argue back and forth, and finally, frustrated, fed up, Brodsky says, you know what, wait here. And he leaves, and he comes back with a CAT scan, a cross-section of my chest, and he puts it up on the light board. And on it, there is this hostile white acre of tumor surrounding a small black pea-sized hole. And he points at the little black hole, and he says, all of this is tumor. That little pea, that's his windpipe. Should be the size of a $50. That's why he can't breathe very well. And just then, I felt and heard the raspy wheeze of air moving through too small a space. Suddenly, I could hear the air conditioner above me. I could feel the crinkly paper beneath me. I could smell cologne from some prior patient now long gone. But most of all, I felt that weight, the sheer heaviness that glued me to the spot, as if my life had paused. While I sat there dissociating, my mother and Brodsky continued their negotiations. They settled on 10 days. We would have 10 days to explore donating sperm, and then I had to start chemotherapy. Well, it's later that night. It's right after dinner. My little brother is gone in his bedroom because it's not his turn to do the dishes. My mother is a list maker. She's got her notebook open. She's starting to make her list for the next day. She's called the sperm bank. Most of it sounds pretty straightforward. There's some evidence that sperm can live frozen in liquid nitrogen for 10 years, maybe longer. Then when you need it, you just thaw it out, I guess. There are a few details that are unsettling. The sperm bank is across town and doesn't have a patient waiting area. The technician my mother has spoken to has emphasized that the sperm must get from my body into the sperm bank within a half hour. Taken together, these facts mean that I will have to do my part at home, and then my parents will drive my sperm to the bank. What? On hearing the bit about the half hour, my father disappears into his study and comes out with automobile club maps of Bloomfield and Hartford, Connecticut, and he puts them down on the kitchen table and stands over them like General Patton. The stoplight to distance ratio on Asylum Avenue will be far superior to the stoplight to distance ratio on Farmington Avenue. He starts like mapping out. Then my little brother starts to wander in like he's probably looking for dessert as my mother, who's got her notebook open, starts making her list for the next day. Okay, at 9 o'clock, I give you money to buy more marijuana. You're home by 9:45. Then you masturbate. Then we get your sperm to the bank by 10:15. And then I'm going grocery shopping. Anything you want from the grocery, honey? I go, yeah, Ma, get me some pretzels. My mom writes it down, pretzels. We all look up at my brother. Anything you want from the grocery, honey? My brother looks as if his family's been like abducted and replaced by duplicates. He like silently walks back to his bedroom. So the next morning, I'm in my old high school bedroom, surrounded by the trappings of my adolescence, right? There's a rusting trumpet, my old wrestling letter, there's a poster of like Blondie on the ceiling. My father is outside behind the wheels of the Chevy Citation, perched like Mario Andretti or a NASCAR driver. And he's getting sounds from this 4-cylinder vehicle that it's never... My mother is standing right outside my door. I can hear her shifting her weight. I pull the magazines out from under the bed. I figure if ever there was a time for the Pornography Hall of Fame tour, right, this has to be it. For a while, I'm distracted by logistics involving the fact that there's the magazine, the donation cup, and I only have 2 hands, and oh, that's really more information than you need. Finally, soft curves, skimpy underwear, propel the magic process along. I race to the door, open my bedroom door, hand my mother the cup. She is all business. She takes that cup and she goes, "Pretzels, right?" And they raced off into the morning. Thanks. So, I didn't have a children's hospital near me. I was treated next to people in their 60s and 70s. I didn't know any young adults. And once, we would all, at the time I was a junior at Vassar College, which is a beautiful school in upstate New York, a culture of mostly middle-class white adolescents from New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut with an occasional like Murdoch or DuPont thrown into the mix. But the chemotherapy, and they're mostly white, but the chemotherapy waiting rooms where I got hit in Hartford, people from all walks of life, young, old, black, white, Latino, Asian, we would all sit together on the green vinyl chairs waiting to have chemotherapy. Who picks out the goddamn green vinyl chairs? Those things that you like stick to them, what the hell? And anyway, so I'm sitting there waiting to get chemotherapy, and I'd covered my bald head that day with a round and colorful beanie that sported a plastic propeller, you know. And she was knitting something, this just beautiful garment across her lap, and her hands were moving at like Mach. I can't knit at all, so this is the lamest mime of knitting you're ever gonna see in your whole life. So she's like knitting, prancing, pausing, you know, she asked me about the goofy hat, and I asked her what she was knitting. And she looked at me like I might not quite have a security clearance level high enough for that kind of information. And then she said, "Every time I get a new doctor, I tell them I am as talented with yarn as they are with medicine. I tell them I'm going to knit them the finest sweater ever touched by human hands. This is going to be a soft, warm, scintillating garment they won't never want to take off. They're going to want to wake up in it, drive to work in it, tend to their patients in it." And then her voice dropped to a deep, church-nurtured baritone. "Sing in it, swim in it, bathe in it," she said. And then, and here's the most important part, "I never quite finish it, and they always keep me alive." Because that's what the experience is about, right? It's about this uncommon, unflinching vulnerability that is with you every moment at the frozen food section of the supermarket, at a stop sign, and in the shower, this creeping vulnerability. But her solution to that vulnerability remains, to this day, the most elegant I have encountered. Chart note. Sequential x-rays throughout the course of therapy in order to marked reduction in the size of the mediastinal mass and complete resolution of the lymphadenopathy. At completion of this therapy, a chest CT revealed some residual. However, it's our opinion that this represents scar only. It's 13 months later. New chart note. This is a healthy-appearing 22-year-old Caucasian male with a history of stage 2B non-sclerosing Hodgkin's disease who presented with a 4-week history of persistent cervical lymphadenopathy. A new 4-centimeter matted and fixed left cervical node was palpated. The patient has been referred to the surgical team for a nodal biopsy. So By now, I've left Vassar College and I've gone on to the University of Florida. Go Gator! Okay. I'm gonna get like booed off the stage. So, and I've recently found this thing that's like hard tire rubber, and I know what the hell that is, right? My tumors always came up and like introduced themselves, like, "Hi, I'm Bob. Hey, how are you?" Hi. It wasn't like subtle, like, "Hi, I'll be over here. My name's Bob. I'll just be back over here." So I had a pretty good sense of what that was. So now I'm standing in the Gainesville airport, right? And this isn't like Denver or O'Hare or Logan, where many of you probably came in from, or LAX, right? There's 2 gates in Gainesville, and you can see both of them in one spot. My parents, you know, they fly, their plane comes in, they're gonna try to hang with me during the biopsy. I see my father's bald head, and then my mom, or, you know, she's got her purse across her like she's going to war, and we go to baggage claim. You need like a U-Haul to transport my mother. This woman is not an efficient packer, so it's no surprise when this massive bag comes down the conveyor, and I'm like, "Well, Ma, you got Jimmy Hoffa's body in there or something?" Like he's like, you know, the missing union organizer. So my father, and I'm like, "Dad, remember, square back, bend from the hips. We don't want what happened at Bradley International to happen here again, okay? Here we go." Oh my God. So my father and I worked to get the Jimmy Hoffa bag out to my little graduate student hatchback. We have to keep the hatch up to get my mom's bag, you know, all the way back to my little graduate student apartment. Now, I have a plan for this. Recently, I have met the nursing supervisor of the bone marrow transplant unit, and in the vernacular of the day, she's a hottie. And I think maybe she's the one, and she's gonna meet my parents. I know it's odd circumstances, but I really want this to go well. I particularly want to impress Terry, you know, this new woman in my life. So we get the Jimmy Hoffa bag into my graduate student apartment. There's a knock at the door. It's Terry. I introduce her to my parents. I'm always nervous about what my mother's going to like do or say though, so I want this to go well. So this is the part I've rehearsed. I'm like, "Hey, let me get you guys some pillows, blankets, and towels." I want to look domestic in front of Terry, right? So I'm like, "I'll be right." I don't mention that these are the same things I stole from their house before I went to grad school. So I'm going down my little short hallway feeling like pretty proud of myself when I hear Terry, I think the love of my life, saying to my mother, "You checked that through? Is that what I think it is?" I come back into the room, "Oh no, my plan is foiled." In time to see my mother lift and finally free from the Jimmy Hoffa bag the largest Ziploc baggie of marijuana I have ever seen in my entire life. Thanks, Ma. The patient underwent a nodal biopsy. Pathology confirmed recurrent Hodgkin's disease. Further CT scan evaluation revealed a possible increase in the residual mediastinal mass. The patient will now receive an autologous bone marrow transplant. Probability of surviving transplant is 75%. The 5-year survival rate, given his current relapse, is at least 40%. So I thought really carefully about what I was going to bring with me onto the unit. See, as a young psychologist, I was in graduate school for psychology, I had treated a young girl with my same disease on the bone marrow transplant unit. She'd had a transplant, she'd relapsed soon after, and then died. And I was scheduled to be transplanted in the same room. So I thought really carefully, I was going to have to live like boy in a bubble inside this room, like, you know, with air control and all this stuff. So I thought really carefully about what I was going to bring with me, right? I felt like I was going to war in there. I started with the walls. I brought in landscape prints, cards from well-wishers and friends, brought in some goofy things, battery-operated water gun, Groucho Marx nose and glasses. I brought in a VCR, movies, but the most important thing I brought in was a battery-operated, remote-controlled red light. See, I was going to have to use a toilet, a commode, right in the middle of the room. And I'd seen nursing staff walk in on patients when they were on the commode, and I'm like, that is not happening to me. So I drew up a sign that said, if the red light is on, don't come in. And then using stuff I got from Home Depot, I wired up this remote control with a red light outside the door. I agreed, you know, the staff agreed not to come in when the red light was on, and I agreed not to, well, you know, keep it on all the time. In concert, these changes altered the landscape of this room. It looked like a real person's room. It felt like a real person's room. And because I, a simple patient, controlled when people came in and out, it was my room. Well, one morning I woke to find 3 physicians standing at the end of my bed. They had that like official, legitimate air about them, you know, like pilots or attorneys, you know. There was an older one, hair gelled gray back, 2 younger ones bookending him. One of the younger ones pointed at me, his hand like a canoe paddle, and he says, "This is a 22-year-old Caucasian man with a history of stage 2B non-field scorching Hodgkin's." And I said, "Oh, I'm sorry. Who are you guys?" And the older one made a slight but definite gesture. He went like this. I'll do it again in case you missed it. Then he looks at the young one. The young one looks awkwardly from me to the old one, but he continues. Right. His conditioning regimen included high-dose VP16, high-dose adriamycin, high-dose Cytoxan. And I said, I'm sorry, who are you guys? And this time, I looked up to find his fingers standing in a proud little row like little soldiers, and I realized, he's giving me the crossing guard stop sign. Stop, the hand said. And then it opened. Go. With just the tiniest eyebrow of indignance. So the young one, again, looks from me to the old one, but he continues. Obviously, his CBC isn't back yet for today, but yesterday's neutrophil count. And I said, I'm sorry, who are you guys? And this time his hand started way up at his shoulder and came roaring down. Stop, the hand said. And then it opened. Go. I felt something resonate. It was like when I was 12, and I'd ridden my bike across town to the park, and that bully grabbed my bike and said, "It's mine now, sucker." He was taking the room away from me. He was stealing it. But it was my room. I fought to create it. So I did the only thing that I felt was available to me to do in the moment. I reached for my trusted friend. I had originally been attracted to the box at Toys R Us because of the packaging. Emblazoned in bright black block letters, it read, 30-foot soaker. Takes 16 D batteries. The cover of the box showed his boy like really close up running in obvious terror from what is clearly the ultimate in-water weaponry. To be honest, there's a lot about what happened next I don't remember. I do remember some sputtered utterances of surprise, some hands raised in defense, a wad of wet gray hair on a forehead. And then thinking, man, those guys could really move. Because the young one goes, so in conclusion, this is a 20 with an Uzi. I anticipated some guilty pang, you know, when you've crossed despite the crossing guard saying not to. But none materialized. I felt energized, even got out of bed for the first time in a long time and adjusted one of the prints on the wall. So I was in the room the next morning when this young head peeks in the door. And he goes, I noticed the red light isn't on. Would this be an okay time? Oh, yeah. Oh, okay. And I didn't recognize, and then I recognized it was the young one, and he came in. He sat down. Because sometimes, right, they talk to you with their goddamn hands on the doorknob. He sat down, and we're just two guys getting to know each other. He asked me about life on the unit. He told me about his attending physician's fondness for medical trivia and how the guy tortured him. Just two guys talking. And eventually, he asked me about this rash on my leg caused by some of the chemotherapy and told me about an ointment he was going to give the nursing staff to put on it. And he was right. The ointment worked. It cleared up the rash quickly. But to this day, I'm not sure whose medicine was more effective, his ointment for the rash or my water for their arrogance. How many of you have stayed overnight in the hospital? Yeah, most of you. There are two kinds of night nurses. Oh, they know who they are. At one end of the spectrum, there's Militant Mary. It could be a guy, but we're going with Mary. Mary has been discharged from the service, but she doesn't remember that. She views getting my blood pressure at 4 a.m. the same way they viewed storming the beaches of Normandy to win World War II. I will get his blood pressure, sir. Yes, sir. She approaches my room. It's 3:30 in the morning. Steps inside, turns on the overhead lights. Grabs your arm, whips the blood pressure cuff around. like she's wrestling a steer. 120/80. You're fine. Good night. What is it, the apocalypse? Is it the apocalypse? What happened? I knew it was coming. Oh. Mary? Oh, man. I was like dreaming, man. Note to self. Call Mary at her home at 10 a.m. At the other end of the spectrum, there's the stealth nurse. The stealth nurse is like all Velcro down, wearing jet black. Approaches your room like it's a safe. Got one of those little pen lights, approaches your bed. Has seen all she needs to see. Ties threads through an eye slit on the ceiling, ties it to your arm. Slides the blood pressure cover. You start to wake up, holds black cloth over your eyes. The stealth nurse could come into your room at 3:30 in the morning, take one of your organs, and you would have no idea. Like you're like waking up the next morning. God, what did I do with it? Isn't it? No? Honey, what are you looking for? My pancreas. I remember having it at 10. I don't know. And chemo brain was so funny. Well, I spent so much time looking for things during all that. Like, isn't chemo brain great? It's like such a great excuse for like losing your keys. Or like, yeah, I parked in front of a fire hydrant. Chemo brain. Oh, I was really crappy to you on email. Oh, chemo brain. If it only came with better parking. Long live the stealth nurse, right? Yeah. How many health professionals are here? Can you raise your hands? There's like survivors here, like who are also health professionals or wearing the health professional badge, like just trying to like, hey, just fit in. I'm going to tell a story about a health professional while I've got you. So I had 6 days straight of chemotherapy for the bone marrow transplant. 2 days of what someone decided to call rest. Liars. And then I got my own marrow back. I'd never had 2 days in a row of chemotherapy. I was always hit like day 1, day 8, day 1, day 14, whatever. Never 2 days in a row, let alone 6. At the end of the long first dizzying day of chemotherapy, a montage of darkness and light, I said to Terry, my goodness, it has been a long day. And she said, oh, sweetheart, this is the 4th day. It was 3 weeks before I was capable of any clear thought. And by then, my body and my environment had changed, right? I had the big, the swollen prednisone cheeks, was bald, didn't look like myself anymore, didn't feel like it anymore. But finally, 3 weeks in, my mind cleared enough. So I got a pencil and a pad, because writing is how I make my way through the world. For some of you, it's like talking to friends, or you've got some cool new apps, or I just learned there's a bot. You can talk to a computer. How are you? So I began to write, but my unpracticed hand lost the pencil, and it bounced onto the floor. And I leaned over to pick it up, and I spilled my urinal. And I know in the comfort of this space, this is going to be hard to get, but some of you have been there. And that cold stench just filled the room. In that moment, it felt like the thin thread between me and the rest of humanity had finally been severed. I could have hit the call light at any time, but I didn't. I felt frozen, weary, beaten down, just tired of fighting. So many of us have been there, right? You've been there. And sitting there, and I should have hit the call light, but I didn't. I just sat there in my own cold fluids, feeling just a little sorry for myself. And then finally, one of these nurses breezes into the room. There's a quick appraisal of the situation, a few distracting words about the weather, and in a blink, I was cleaned up. Had a fresh pencil, a fresh pad, a new blankets, and they were gone. I'm certain that the number of times I'll move between such radical extremes, from serious depression to being just good enough to keep going, will be counted on one hand. But when I went back to thank this person 3 weeks later, they had no memory for the event, had no idea what I was talking about. And frankly, neither do most health professionals. So let's tell them. From those of us who are wordless and vulnerable, to those of you who do this work with us, walking with us, who treat us like decent human beings along the way, no matter what we throw at you, let us say thank you. Thank you. Oh, I'm not done. Thank I'll talk about health professionals again in a minute. The patient encountered common post-transplant complications, including myelosuppression requiring blood transfusions, rashes secondary to antibiotics, fevers with neutropenia, nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea. This represented a fairly uncomplicated post-transplant course. He was discharged from the BMTU after a 4-week hospitalization. He will remain in limited isolation at home and be seen frequently in our outpatient transplant clinic. It's 13 months later. This is an unfortunate 24-year-old white male who presents with relapsed Hodgkin's disease. He recently presented 1 year and 1 month following his transplant with a new right supraclavicular node. This node was biopsied and is consistent with Hodgkin's disease. In summary, the patient presents following a second relapse with likely metastatic disease. So I relapsed after a bone marrow transplant. And the first thing I thought of was taking my credit cards just a little less seriously. I had this idea, this fantasy of going into a restaurant and going, I'm going to do the entire right side of the menu, including all of the desserts, and I would like your car. just put it on this. But around the time I was trying to decide what to do, I saw a docudrama about Satchel Paige, the great black baseball pitcher. And in it, the character playing Satchel Paige talks about his pitching arm when he wasn't pitching well. He says, I know she'll be back. She always comes back. My hope was like that. No matter how much I tried to put it aside, just live until I can't live anymore, call this thing chronic and just get on with it, my hope came swooping back. So I used my skills as a graduate student researcher. Tara used her connections in oncology. And we flew across the country to see the guru in Hodgkin's disease, whom I cold called, waking him up at 6 o'clock in the morning at his home. So he put all my scans up in one room and traced my disease. Starting at the very beginning, adriamycin, bleomycin, cytoxin, DTIC, prednisone, procarbazine, nitrogen mustard, vincristine, vinblastin, VP16, 2600 mantle radiation, 9 surgeries. He put his hand on my shoulder, got close enough to look me right in the eyes, and says, I'm sorry. I don't think I can cure you, but I'll try. So now I'm standing in Sergio's one-man hair salon. This is a really awkward transition. Hang with me. Sergio is dressed all in white. White shoes, white slacks, white shirt. The only sign of color on Sergio's person are his bright pink fingernails. Sergio says to me, people say to me, Sergio, how did you get to be so amazing at cutting people's hair? I tell them I was born with a blow dryer in my hands. I come out of my mother, God rest her soul, and I immediately did up my physician's coif. He says, hey, how come you no bring your beautiful new bride to my chair, huh? Oh, I know. You afraid you bring Terry to my chair, I make her so beautiful, you would have to fight off other men, and you are a coward? I say, Sergio, that's right. He goes, you talk too much, sit down. I sit down on the chair. Sergio looks at me through the mirror and he says, so, what magic am I working today? I say, Sergio, I want you to cut it all off. I want to be bald when I leave here. Oh, he says, you make a joke, huh? Maybe I show you. Maybe I make you look like a Curly from Harlem Globetrotters. I say, no, Sergio, I'm serious. I relapsed. I don't want my hair falling out and getting all over everything like it did last time. I really want to be bald. What, you sick again? Again? I say, yes, Sergio. And then he says, without even a trace of that fake Italian accent, you know, I lost my Michael to the gay disease. I'm going to take care of you. He opens a drawer, pulls out a shaver, plugs it in, turns it on, and at first seems startled by its insistent buzz. And then ever so gently, he pulls my head into his chest. And he begins to shear. And as he shears, I feel his first locks of hair fall on my shoulders, and I feel myself well up. Oh, man, this is really happening. Here we go again. But there's something enormously comforting about being pulled into this man's chest. And he shears, moving his head almost imperceptibly, as if to a dirge, a song only he can hear. And he shears, and just as he's finishing, another patron walks into the salon. Sergio suddenly stands away from me and says, there, you bastard, that's what you get for insulting me. Next time you come in here, I shave off your eyebrows, too. No, I don't, none of your stinking money neither. You get out of here. I get up to leave, and I turn around, and Sergio has pressed his hands together in prayer like a mother, and he says, "Oh, Godspeed, sweetie. Godspeed." I'm not one of those people who's glad to have had cancer. I know some people view it like a gift, and that's cool. I'm just not one of them. I would trade all the opportunities I had packaged with this experience. I mean, I've worked in television, on Grey's Anatomy, and other TV shows, and written books, and all that. I'd trade it in a heartbeat for a chemotherapy-free lifetime. But I was not given a choice, and neither were most of you. And there are these rare moments of honor and grace and true human connection. And sometimes they happen in the strangest places, like Sergio's one-man hair salon. And if we will just wake up enough in those moments to be open to them when they happen, even if they're totally unpredictable, it makes the ride just a little easier. The patient suffered a number of complications. This was not surprising given his history of heavy treatment. He developed sepsis twice. The latter episode was severe and included septic shock, hypotension, cognitive deterioration, and reduced oxygen saturation. After recovering from sepsis, he received his final cycle of chemotherapy, and after this, an additional 2,600 rads of mana radiation. His total radiation dose has now reached its maximum. It should be noted that this represents treatment for the second relapse in this patient. While he received aggressive high-dose therapy here, there's only a remote chance of long-term disease-free survival. So I'm going to tell you one more story. Before I do, my Twitter is Dr. Dan Shaps. If you follow me, I'll follow you. The essays you have just heard come from a book called Mom's Marijuana. 4 years later, I found myself back in a patient waiting room. Back to the appointment books, the fluorescent lights, the two cats hanging from a branch, hang in their baby. Really? I hate these places. I hate the way they smell. I hate everything about them. Like, just the smell of those alcohol wipes, and I'm like, ugh, ugh, ugh. But I'm standing there with Terry, and our new physician breezes in the room. She turns on a machine. I hear a rhythmic alarm. Beep, 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 beep. Oh no, what horrible news are we gonna get now? Because I'm like that now, right? Every time I go into a medical environment, I'm expecting the worst, and I rehearse the worst as if somehow that will inoculate me if something bad happens, when really all it does is make me miserable to be around. So I hear this rhythmic alarm, beep, 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 beep. I'm like, what's that sound? And Lynn, our new physician, says, "Well, that's your baby's heartbeat," she says. "And it's strong." I tried not to think about it. Even after the little being waved at me through the ultrasound machine. Start saving for college. Right? I kept expecting Lynn to say something about a gestational diabetes or a complete previa or something else horrible, but she didn't. She kept saying things look fine. My parents flew into town and we went to Little Things, the store for expecting parents, which just freaked me out. Like I got all superstitious about it, but Mom with the Consumer Reports, like looking up things to find out which objects we should buy that would make our child like succeed in life, you know, like, oh, that stroller, they're gonna be a genius. This stroller, unemployment. Or like Dad, like picking up items and shaking them as if that was gonna tell something. Look, a diaper vault genie thing. If we'd had this when you were a kid, we'd have just stuffed you right in. Oh, never mind. Then we gather and listen to our sales girl explain we need a theme for our baby's room, like jungle animals or Noah's Ark. And I'm like, are we having a baby or are we putting on a one-act play? Terry like elbowed me in the thigh bone. Bang, ooh. Oh, she's like, we're doing this right. Oh, we had jungle animals, I guess. Then we went to Lamaze, the class for expecting parents, where they teach you like the Lamaze magic breathing thing, and they show you the film of 3 different couples giving birth. Like the first couple is like a professional birthing couple. He's like, look into my eyes, baby. And she goes, and because they do it the Lamaze way, it's like a 29-minute birth. It's like a drive-through birth. Like, and they celebrate. Then the second couple shows everyone being nervous. They have a C-section, but things turn out well. But it was truly the third couple that made me feel better, because it shows the woman like 9 hours into labor, and she's like, I am wicked nauseous. And every time her husband goes to touch her, she goes, wah! You did this. He's like, you're wicked nauseous, huh? You think maybe it was that huge Philly cheesesteak you had before we got started? I figured if they could do okay, maybe Terry would be fine. They gave Terry a great room overlooking Tucson, which is where we lived at the time, and she labored without medication, and then Lynn said it's time to push. But just like I had rehearsed, the little being that Lynn pulled from Terry was stone cold blue. And our nurse, who'd been laughing and joking with us just minutes before, ran over to the wall and mashed on the NICU call button, and sneakered feet poured into the room and whisked the little blue being away and curtained around so that we couldn't see. No! But there was something so familiar about it, like I'd already been there, even though this is my first experience, anything like this. It was like I was on an elevator snapping at its cables, roaring downward, gravity turned up. No! Back in Gainesville, listening to my physician tell me about the physiology of relapse while he draws cancer cells on the crinkly paper. I don't know why when they're telling you you've relapsed, they draw cells on the crinkly paper. Like, who gives a shit what the cells look like? And then, the bag inflating, deflating, inflating, deflating over the beeps and whirs, all of a sudden an uneven, high-pitched, brassy trumpet cry. A cry? A proud, strong cry. And Alexandra settled as if she's already done this 1,000 times, into Terry's arms, toes wiggling, feet wiggling, fingers wiggling to a chorus of coos and ah there's. And I know Terry is smiling at me, but I can't take my eyes off those tiny nails on those tiny fingers squeezing with life and endurance around my thumb. Alexandra, a product of sperm banked in 1987, graduated from college just last week, and her sister, also a product of that sperm, is a pole vaulter who will pole vault for Bucknell University, and I have been disease-free since 1991. When my mother planted a weed she despised in her garden, it told me we have to take a square look at what's really important to us and then live that way. The second thing I took away is that we have to be assertive with our medical teams. I'm not saying we all need high-powered battery-operated water guns, but I'm not saying we don't neither. And finally, I would not have children if it weren't for my mother's willingness to speak to that other woman in that waiting room. This conference, these times we connect, are so important. Sometimes we're afraid to talk to other patients because we're afraid they'll go, hey, Madge, this guy's got the same disease Uncle Louie had, and he died in like 5 minutes. Oh, he's gonna die in 5 minutes. Like, we're afraid to reach out to other patients because we're afraid of what we might hear. But if we will have the courage to tolerate the vulnerability to do that, there is so much wisdom in this room. And that's how I have children. I want to thank you so much for having me. It has been my deepest honor. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I'm honored.